Now, remember the creed. So I, at one point, copied, one of the creeds here. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. Remember, that's the Platonic dichotomy. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, and born of the Father before all ages. So this is the. I think I mentioned that the argument really was over one iota of difference, because in the position of Arius, it's homo ousios. Ousios is existence, and homo is man. So the e, which means n, right, means that you've got actually a separation, between man and God. Whereas in Athanasius, you have homoousios, which means one substance. No, I shouldn't have said man. Anthropos is man in Greek. Homo means the same. So sorry about that. I misspoke. But the idea is there's a difference with the heresy, and there isn't with the correct interpretation that Jesus is both man and God at the same time. By the way, I think I mentioned that a modern view of how that worked is that you need a role model. And basically, this individual man lived such a wonderful life that his life was a divine role model for us. So if we imitatio Christi, which is the point of many of the orders of the various monks. So basically, living a life the way Christ did is the goal. And remember, one of the earlier questions I asked the class was, if Jesus came to your door and asked you to, go follow him, would you go? That's a live question, and what does it really mean? Basically giving up our attachment to things. And as Americans, we're really happy with our things. It's really hard for, I think, Americans to give up that attachment. I'm not really interested in giving up my attachment to books. Other people. There's tons of things that I'm attached to. We're fortunate, though. There's a lot of people in the world that don't have that kind of luxury to make that choice. But the other choice would be to basically be an ascetic. Ascetic individual is a person that doesn't find them. They do the best they can in order to live as simple a life as possible. And that usually means following the rule of Augustine. So these are the rules if you want to live this kind of monastic life. You're going to live harmoniously. Call nothing your own, but let everything be yours in common. Food and clothing shall be distributed, etc. So you get the idea. So live a life of prayer and not be attached to things. I think I also mentioned that Buddhism, if you become a Buddhist in the sense, I think the more ideal example that Buddha led was giving up attachment to things through the religions that basically teach you how to be successful as a farmer, etc., etc. Instead of doing that, the real, path is to give up attachment to things, and that seems to be pretty much the main point for any of the world religions. I think Islam does the same thing. You're giving up attachment to things. So it's kind of interesting why all of those all focus on that. And of course, living in a world where we're currently experiencing things like global warming and fires in California, and everybody's lost their homes and upset because they don't have insurance anymore because the insurance companies saw that coming. Attachment to things seems to go hand in hand with creating global warming. Would we have been living in a better life if we hadn't had the Industrial Revolution? Although there was a lot of pollution during the Roman Empire as well. They made lots of things, but the processes were not as clean, so in the various archaeological digs, you could see that there was a lot more carbon in the air during certain periods in the Roman Empire than even now, actually. But okay. So, St. Augustine, I should mention that his Confessions, I have it. Oh, and the quiz question should be, do we have free will? So this is a question that absolutely goes with Augustine. And if you think about it, why is this one an issue? Well, if God made the world, including us, then obviously anything we choose to do is God's fault. If I have a dog and I don't train the dog to not bite the mailman, and it goes out and it bites the mailman, that's my fault. People will blame the dog, of course, but at the same time, it's my fault, and I'll be the one that's sued by the post office, right? So, it's God's fault that you make any choice you do. And in fact, in a contemporary continuation of this argument, we have Stephen? Robert Sapolsky. So, and it's determined. So this is a relatively recent book on the subject, Science of Life Without Free Will. Basically, from a contemporary scientific point of view, your genes, of course, are triggered by stimuli. You have epigenetic influences that change which genes are triggered, from the womb experience, the womb with a view to right now, actually, right? And that's we're still learning and understanding more and more about that. But also, when you do a reading of the brain, what you discover, it seems that a microsecond before you actually make a decision, your brain has made the decision, and it seems like your awareness of the decision you made comes afterwards. It supervenes on top of the decision. So in other words, your body's already deciding to do whatever it does, which makes sense. You want it to do that as fast as possible, dodge the bullet, or whatever, that's coming. You want to be as quick as possible, or you'll lose at table tennis. But the idea, of course, is that it seems like I made the decision to do that. Well, the contemporary neuroscientist will argue that that's just kind of a program that's riding on top of the decisions your brain makes. Actually, your brain makes the decision, and you think you were the one that did it, right? So in other words, there's no real you making decisions. Everything happens in a causal way. Right? There's no freedom of choice. You will choose to do exactly what you're going to have to choose to do because of all these cause and effect relationships. And in fact, if you're using a model, a science model, that doesn't believe that there's miracles, it's a joke, the scientist is sitting there, I did this, and I did this, and then this, and a miracle occurred, and this happened. Well, that doesn't work in the lab, right? For anybody, right? Because you have to be in the model that says everything is physically explained by what previously existed, and as a result, in that model, no one really has freedom of choice. Well, that screws up jury trials for one. I mean, you talk with lawyers, and when they're trying to figure out who should they have on the jury, they want Christian old ladies, because Christian old ladies are much more likely to believe that you had the choice to do good or bad, and you chose to do evil, so therefore you should be locked up for the rest of your life. Those are the jurors you want. You don't want the young scientist who says, well, any of us in that position would have done exactly the same thing, so we ought not punish the person for doing what we all would have done. Instead, it's society's fault for setting up people in this kind of a situation, right? So what we ought to do is reform our environment so that people don't end up making bad choices. It's not their fault, right? So you've got two totally different models, right? And the question, of course, is do you have free will? That sounds like miracles occur. Out of no place, all of a sudden, you make a decision. And if you have a soul, theoretically, that would be where that comes from. Well, Augustine has this problem even in the beginning. It gets worse, by the way, if you're a follower of John Calvin. John Calvin and the Protestant faith called Calvinism. He was actually an Augustinian monk, contemporary of Martin Luther and others. We'll talk about him as we get up that way historically. But in any case, the big problem for that Calvinist is predestination, right? Obviously, God created you, knew all ahead of the time, whatever choices you were going to make, and so you're saved or not already. You're predestined. And so what can you do? Well, clearly if you're predestined to be saved, you're going to be wealthy and happy, and you're going to have all this, because obviously you're saved. See, you're living a good life, and so you've got all the good things. So the rich people are clearly saved. That's a Calvinist issue, right? If you're poor, you deserve it. Obviously, because God made you poor. So it's, I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that's the Calvinist point of view that built on Augustine when you go back to Augustine. So, is this fun? You guys having fun? There's lots of other things. If you try to figure out time, one of the things that I love about Augustine is that we put God in the center, and we look at everything as kind of going around God, and we say, seems like God interacts with me, right? I pray to God, please, Lord, let the road be non-slippery today. All those kinds of things. May the price of eggs not go up. Whatever, right? And it seems like God responds. I don't know if you hear God's voice as female or as George White's, with a cigar. That was a movie, there's one movie where I think it's he was sweeping the parking garage. What was anybody? No? Shoot. Well, there's lots of different ways. Actually, when God made man, she was only joking. You've heard that one? Well, in any case, it seems like God interacts with us. whether for our benefit or not, whatever, right? And so that would suggest that God is changing like a physical creature. And the problem, of course, is God officially can't be doing that. So the problem for Augustine is that we exist in time. So the issue for Augustine, let's see, this is AI, right? So notice that's just like our choice of good and evil. For Augustine, we're the ones that experience time. In fact, what is time? Oh, let's go to an actual text. There's, well, I'll just go by memory because I've only got a few minutes left here. When somebody asks me what time is, I don't know what to say. I mean, I can say that there's a long time. I've lived 73 years. That seems like a long time. On the other hand, you know, if you were Methuselah, that's short, right? But there's other people out there that live just a short time, right? One class seems an awfully short time, actually. It's just an hour, 15 minutes. We have long time seasons or something, right? You know, so we have an understanding of the length of time. 2 seconds, an hour, right? We have no problem figuring out dimensions of time that way, etc. But when I ask, what is time? I don't really understand it. I know that there can't be a now unless there's, this is my interpretation of great literature, by the way, in the Confession. We know that there's a now, right? Because there's a past. So I have a conception of the past. Well, what is the past? Well, the past is my present conception of the past. So the only reason I have a sense of the past is because I exist now and I'm thinking about the past, right? The past doesn't actually exist. It's not here now, right? The only thing that's here right now is now, right? Same thing with the future. When I think about the future, guess what? The future doesn't exist now. It's my present interpretation of what's coming, right? You know, so everything exists right now. Only right now exists, right? For Augustine, right? But for God, all time exists at once. Because when God created the universe, He created the whole universe all at once.